Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. The atmosphere inside the Genoa City Athletic Club was unusually tense that afternoon. Even though the lounge was filled with quiet conversations and the soft clinking of glasses, Chelsea Lawson could feel the weight of worry pressing down on her shoulders. Across from her sat Adam Newman, leaning back in his chair with his usual calm exterior. But Chelsea knew him well enough to see the strain hiding behind his expression. Victor Newman's latest plan had hit a wall. Chelsea wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, though the drink had long gone cold. Your father never gives up, she said quietly, but this time it feels different. Adam exhaled slowly. It is different, he admitted. He thought he had everything lined up perfectly to get Newman Enterprises back under full control, but the pieces aren't falling into place the way he expected. Chelsea studied him. You've done everything you could to help him. Adam gave a faint, humorless smile. My father doesn't believe in everything you could. He believes in winning, anything less is failure. Chelsea leaned forward slightly. Well, for what it's worth, I think he's proud of you. Adam's eyes flickered with surprise. Chelsea nodded firmly. He is, you stepped up when the family needed you. You tried to fix things, that matters. Adam looked down at the table for a moment, considering her words. Maybe, he said quietly. But none of it matters if Connor suffers because of all this. At the mention of their son, Chelsea's expression softened. That's exactly what scares me. Adam frowned slightly. What do you mean? Chelsea sighed. Connor deserves stability, a future, not this constant chaos. Adam gave a small chuckle. If it comes down to it, he'll survive. Newman blood runs strong. Chelsea smiled faintly. Living on love alone might not be enough. Adam tilted his head. Hey, we could always move to Las Vegas. Chelsea raised an eyebrow. Oh, really? Adam smirked. You know, go back to my old life, become a professional card shark again. Chelsea laughed softly. A spider returns. Adam shrugged casually. I was good at it. Chelsea leaned back in her chair. You were dangerously good at it. Adam's smirk widened. And you weren't exactly innocent either. Chelsea raised her hands defensively. Hey, I never said I didn't enjoy the con life. Adam studied her carefully. You're thinking about it again. Chelsea's smile faded. Not seriously. Adam watched her. Chelsea. Oh, she sighed. Okay, maybe the thought crossed my mind. Adam shook his head slowly. We worked too hard to leave that life behind. Chelsea nodded. I know, but there was a spark in her eyes that suggested the idea still tempted her. Across town, the atmosphere inside Philly's Summers office was far less relaxed. Billy Abbott burst through the door without knocking. Phyllis barely looked up from her laptop. You know, most people knock. Billy ignored the comment. Victor kidnapped Jack. Phyllis blinked once. Then she laughed. Seriously? Billy stared at her in disbelief. You think this is funny? Phyllis leaned back in her chair. Victor abducting Jack Abbott, that's not exactly original. Billy clenched his jaw. He hates Jack more than anyone in this city. Phyllis shrugged. That doesn't mean he actually grabbed him. Billy leaned forward over her desk. I need the contracts. Phyllis narrowed her eyes. What contracts? The Chancellor contracts. Phyllis slowly closed her laptop. And why exactly would I give those to you? Billy's voice dropped. Because if Jack is really in danger, we don't have time to argue. Phyllis crossed her arms. You're assuming a lot. Billy stared at her. Jack was your husband once. Phyllis rolled her eyes. Yes, Billy once. Billy's expression hardened. Look, I'm not asking nicely. Phyllis smirked. That's obvious. Billy pointed at her. You've got 1 hour. Her smile faded slightly. Or what? Billy straightened. You really don't want to find out. He turned and walked out of the office without another word. Phyllis stared after him. Another vague threat, she muttered. Miles away on the dark waters of Lake Michigan, Jack Abbott paced the luxurious but confining cabin of a large yacht. He had been trying to keep calm, trying to think logically, trying to figure out exactly who had arranged this kidnapping. But when the door suddenly opened, logic was the last thing on his mind. Standing in the doorway was Patty Williams, dressed in a loud animal print outfit. Jack froze. Patty." She smiled brightly. "Hello, Jack." Jack stared at her in disbelief. "You were supposed to be in a psychiatric hospital." Patty stepped inside casually. "Oh, that." She waved a hand dismissively. "I've made tremendous progress." Jack crossed his arms. "You tried to kill me." Patty tilted her head. "Yes, well, I've done a lot of self-reflection since then." Jack didn't move. "You expect me to believe that?" Patty walked around the room slowly. "I've been working very hard to confront my past." Jack studied her carefully. "You're saying you've been rehabilitated?" Patty nodded proudly. Exactly." Jack remained silent. Patty's smile widened. "I heard you're back together with Diane's." Jack frowned. "What does that have to do with anything?" Patty clasped her hands. "It proves you believe in redemption." Jack gave a dry laugh. "That's not the same thing." Patty stepped closer. "I came here to help you." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Help me?" Patty nodded eagerly. "Oh, yes." Jack gestured around the locked cabins. "This is your version of help." Patty sighed. "I just came to check on you." Jack studied her carefully. "And?" Patty moved toward the door. "I'll be back." Before Jack could say another word, she stepped outside and locked the door. Jack stared at it in disbelief. Then he began packing the room again. About an hour later, the door opened once more. Patty entered pushing a small cart filled with food and drinks. Jack stopped packing. "I'm not eating anything." Patty smiled. "Oh, please." She picked up a glass. "I'll taste it first." Jack watched her suspiciously. Patty took a sip. "See, not poisoned." Jack folded his arms. "That's comforting." Patty placed the glass down. "You know, I've spent years thinking about everything I did." Jack didn't respond. Patty continued softly. "The things I did to you, to your sisters." Her voice faltered slightly. "They were monstrous." Jack remained cautious. Patty looked up at him. "But I finally faced it." Jack said nothing. "I accepted what I had become." Her eyes filled with emotion. "And once I accepted it, I realized I could rebuild myself." Jack tilted his head. "You're trying to become human again." Patty nodded slowly. "Oh, yes." Jack stared at her for a long moment. But he still wasn't convinced. Meanwhile, at the Newman ranch, Victor Newman stood near the fireplace when Phyllis Summers stormed into the room. Victor barely glanced at her. "Phyllis." She crossed her arms. "Where, Jack?" Victor smirked slightly. "I'm not sure what you're talking about." Phyllis rolled her eyes. "Oh, please." Victor turned toward her slowly. "You should be careful making accusations." Phyllis stepped closer. "Billy told me everything." Victor's expression didn't change. "Billy talks too much." Phyllis leaned forward. "And if you want Chancellor Industries." Victor raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you'll have to deal with me." Victor chuckled. "Oh, you?" Phyllis nodded confidently. "Billy doesn't control Chancellor." Victor's smile widened. "I know." Phyllis blinked. Victor stepped closer. "This is not a negotiation." Phyllis scoffed. "You're not actually going to bury Jack somewhere." Victor's voice turned cold. "You're putting him in danger." Phyllis hesitated. Then she made her offer. Chancellor Industries in exchange for Jack. Victor burst into laughter. Phyllis frowned. What's so funny? Victor shook his head. You're giving in far too quickly. Phyllis lifted her chin. Maybe I'm just a good person. Victor laughed even harder. Yes, that must be it. Phyllis glared at him. But Victor clearly wasn't taking her seriously. At Society, the tension between Billy Abbott, Diane Jenkins, and Kyle Abbott was thick enough to cut with a knife. Billy sat at the table staring down at his phone, clearly irritated. Diane stood nearby with her arms folded tightly across her chest, while Kyle paced slowly back and forth, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. This whole thing is insane, Diane finally snapped. Billy looked up at her. What part of it? Diane's eyes flashed. Phyllis. Kyle stopped packing. She was married to my father, Diane continued, and she's acting like his life isn't even worth the inconvenience. Billy rubbed his forehead. Phyllis only cares about Phyllis. Kyle shook his head. But we don't even know if Jack is actually in danger. Billy looked at him sharply. That's exactly the problem. Kyle frowned. We have no proof. Diane's voice trembled slightly. My husband is missing, that's proof enough for me. Billy leaned back in his chair. I'm just saying, Victor doesn't usually move unless he has a plan. Kyle looked toward him. So what do we do? Billy hesitated for a moment. Then Kyle spoke again. Maybe we go to Victoria. Billy immediately shook his head. No, Kyle frowned. She might be able to help. Billy let out a dry laugh. You think Victoria Newman is going to betray her father to save Jack Abbott? Kyle sighed. It's worth trying. Billy looked frustrated. Look, if Victor really took Jack, then we're dealing with a man who doesn't make mistakes. Diane stepped closer to the table. Then we need leverage. Billy's eyes flickered slightly. That's exactly what I'm working on. Kyle raised an eyebrow. What does that mean? Billy slowly picked up his phone. I already told Phyllis I need the Chancellor contracts. Diane frowned. And if she refuses? Billy's voice grew darker. She won't. Kyle watched him carefully. You sound very confident. Billy hesitated. Then he looked down at his phone again. If Victor thinks he can scare us. Billy quickly typed a message. Then he's about to learn he's not the only one who can play this game. Diane leaned forward. What did you do? Billy hit send. I just made Victor an offer. Kyle frowned. What kind of offer? Billy placed the phone on the table. If he proves Jack is alive, I'll give him Chancellor. Diane's eyes widened. You can't be serious. Billy looked at her calmly. Dead serious. Kyle looked stunned. You'd give Victor that much power. Billy shrugged slightly. I'd give anything to get my brother back. For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of Billy's decision hung in the air. Then suddenly Billy's phone buzzed. All three of them looked down at the screens. Billy picked it up slowly. The number was unlisted. He opened the message. Diane leaned closer. What is it? Billy's expression changed instantly. Kyle stepped beside him. Billy, what is it? Billy slowly turned the phone toward them. On the screen was a photograph. Jack Abbott sat inside a locked cabin. Tired, unshaven, but clearly alive. Diane gasped. Oh my God. Kyle stared at the photo. Oh, that's Dad. Billy swallowed. Below the photo was a short message. 2 simple words. Your move. The room went silent. Back on the yacht, drifting across the dark waters of Lake Michigan, Jack Abbott leaned against the small cabin table, studying Patty Williams carefully. She sat across from him calmly, sipping a glass of wine. Jack still hadn't touched the food she brought. You really expect me to believe you've changed? Jack asked quietly. Patty set the glass down. I don't expect you to believe anything. Jack crossed his arms. That's honest. Patty gave a small smile. I've learned honesty is easier than insanity. Jack studied her expression. For once, Patty seemed almost calm. But Jack wasn't foolish enough to trust appearances. You said you came to free both of us, Jack said slowly. Patty nodded. Oh, yes. Jack gestured toward the locked door. So far, that plan isn't very convincing. Patty sighed softly. You're still very charming, Jack. Jack didn't smile. And you're still avoiding the question. Patty stood and walked slowly across the room. Let's just say, she turned back toward him. I'm not the one in charge. Jack frowned. What does that mean? Patty tilted her head slightly. There are people who believe you deserve to suffer. Jack's jaw tightened. I have a few enemies. Patty smiled faintly. More than a few. Jack stepped closer to her. If you want redemption. Patty raised an eyebrow. Then help me get back to shore. Patty stared at him for a long moment. Her expression softened slightly. You haven't lost your charm. Jack waited. But Patty slowly shook her head. That's not an option. Jack's frustration grew. Why not? Patty walked back toward the door. Because the people running this operation aren't interested in letting you go. Jack's eyes narrowed. Oh, Victor. Patty paused. Then she opened the door. I'll see you later, Jack. The door slammed shut again. And the lock clicked into place. Jack stared at the door, realizing the situation might be far worse than he imagined. Meanwhile, at the Newman ranch, Phyllis Summers stood across from Victor Newman, trying to read his expression. Victor remained perfectly calm. You said you wanted the contracts, Victor said slowly. Phyllis crossed her arms. And you said you'd consider a deal. Victor stepped closer. I said I would consider looking at the paperwork. Phyllis rolled her eyes. A same difference. Victor studied her carefully. You're very eager to hand over Chancellor Industries. Phyllis shrugged. Jack's life seems like a fair trade. Victor laughed quietly. You've never been known for generosity. Phyllis smiled slightly. People change. Victor looked unconvinced. You expect me to believe that? Phyllis leaned forward. I expect you to understand that I want my children to respect me. Victor paused. That answer clearly surprised him. Phyllis continued. I want them to see that I can do the right thing. Victor considered her words carefully. Then he spoke again. You will draw up the papers. Phyllis nodded. And Jack walks free. Victor raised a finger. But if you try to negotiate again. Phyllis sighed. The deal is off, yes, I know. Victor stared at her intensely. I mean it. Phyllis held his gaze. So do I. Victor turned toward the fireplace. Bring me the papers in 1 hour. Phyllis frowned. Why wait? Victor smiled faintly. Because I don't trust you. Phyllis rolled her eyes again. Fair enough. But as she walked toward the door, she couldn't shake the feeling that Victor was still hiding something. Back at the athletic club, Adam and Chelsea sat quietly together. The earlier joking about their old lives had faded. Chelsea stared down at the table. You know what the strange thing is? Adam looked at her. Oh, what? Chelsea sighed. A few years ago, if someone offered us a big con opportunity. Adam smiled faintly. We would have taken it immediately. Chelsea nodded. Without hesitation. Adam reached across the table and took her hand. But that's not who we are anymore. Chelsea looked at him carefully. You're sure? Adam squeezed her hand gently. Completely. Chelsea smiled softly. Oh, good. Then her expression became more serious. But if anyone threatens Connor, Adam's eyes darkened slightly. Then we do whatever it takes. Adam nodded slowly. Whatever it takes. Back at society, Billy continued staring at the photo of his brother. Diane stood beside him, trembling slightly. He's alive, she whispered. Kyle nodded. Oh, yes. Billy looked at the message again. Your move. Diane looked at him. What are you going to do? Billy slowly locked his phone. I'm going to win. Kyle frowned. Against Victor Newman. Billy's expression hardened. Especially against Victor Newman. The battle for Jack Abbott had officially begun. And in Genoa City, that kind of war never ended quietly.